Hi, I wanted to give you a little handbook or some notes on how to make sense of the readings. For right now, you have two readings assigned, and these are chapters that I've extracted from books. One is called Applying Four Classic Theories, and the other is called Ethics and Moral Reasonings. And both of these chapters have some overlapping, sometimes even some contradictory information. And what I want to do is to distill it down into sort of a shorthand or a guide for you to use throughout this course. We're going to be looking at three approaches to ethics. The first is virtue-based, the second is duty-based, and the third is consequence-based. And there's lots of synonyms for these words, things that mean the same thing. So I want to get you familiarized with those words so you know that they are referring to the same things. We'll start with virtue-based ethics. We're going to be using Aristotle to look at virtue. And we'll refer to this approach as the golden mean. The mean referring to kind of a center point or the middle, so that when you're thinking about making some ethics-based decisions involving the media, you might have two extremes that represent, kind of way out there decisions or sensationalistic decisions. But instead, what you're going to do is look for the middle ground, or what we might refer to as a sweet spot. So that middle ground between two extremes. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. We're going to use this one example throughout these slides. And these are front pages from just about a year ago, August of 2015. And you may recognize this story. It's involved the shootings of a television reporter and her cameraman. The shooter was a disgruntled employee who stalked the victim. And as you can see, the news leader has a photograph of the former newsman, and he had recorded all of this in real time as he shot the victim. So this is a photograph of him shooting the victims. On the other side, the Roanoke Times, that's a photograph of members of the community mourning the victims. As you can see, the accompanying headline, State of Shock. So I offer you the middle. The Virginia Pilot front page is kind of representing that golden mean, or that middle ground. Here it honors the victims, and here it depicts them, in happier times, obviously, doing what they love the best, their jobs. Now, the thing about media ethics are there are no real right or wrong answers, so you could probably make a strong case for the Roanoke Times front page too, of arguing that it represents the golden mean as well. I don't think anyone would argue, however, that the news leader represents a golden mean at all. That's sensationalistic, it exploits the victims, and so on. Okay, so we have virtue-based ethics. Now we're going to consider duty-based ethics, and we're going to associate those with the philosopher Immanuel Kant. You'll see these referred to as deontological ethics or rule-based ethics. And so that refers to a strict sense of right and wrong. For example, you may not cheat on a university exam, not because you're afraid you'll get caught, but because it's simply wrong. So there are few exceptions to duty-based ethics, and it's based on absolutes. You don't steal because it's wrong. You don't cheat because it's wrong. You don't maybe put front page photographs of cold-blooded murderers because it's wrong. So again, looking at these three front pages as examples, you definitely would rule out the news leader. And if you were taking sort of a Kantian or a duty-based approach to selecting the most applicable front page, you probably could choose either one because it's more respectful of the victims. Our third approach is referred to as consequence-based ethics. And we associate those with the philosopher John Stuart Mill and his idea of utilitarianism. These refer to outcome-based or ends-based. so that when we're making an ethical decision, we're always thinking about the consequences or the outcome. And by using MIL, we're going to refer to this approach as the greatest good. In other words, that we'll be making an ethics decision based on the greatest good and the least amount of harm for the greatest number of people. Again, if we look at these 3 front pages, I think you could make an argument for either the Virginia Pilot or the Roanoke Times in representing the greatest good. Perhaps you might make a slightly stronger argument for the Roanoke Times in that it is maximizing greatness and minimizing harm, particularly for the victims, their families, and friends. Okay. To quickly summarize, we're going to be taking all of the material in these chapters as well as a couple of others that I'll post on Canvas. And we'll be using 3 lenses and 3 lenses only in which to think about ethics. We'll use the virtue lens as represented by Aristotle, and we'll be thinking of it as the golden mean. What's that sort of middle ground between 2 extremes? What's that balancing point? Our second approach is duty ethics as represented by Kant, and we'll refer to this as rule following. You know, if we follow the rules, what's our best ethical decision? And finally, consequentialist ethics as represented by John Stuart Mill, and we'll refer to this as the greatest good. So what ethics decision represents the greatest good and minimizes the most amount of harm for the greatest number of people? Okay, this is enough to get you started, the shorthand or little guidebook that I put together for you. And as you're reading the chapters, you might want to read the chapters first, come back to the handbook, and so on. You might want to take the information, create your own outline using these 3 headers.